Libya. Libya's pursuit of nuclear weapons began in 1969 after Muammar Gaddafi seized power. Although Libya had signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, the previous year under King Idris, Gaddafi launched a covert weapons program aimed at countering Israel's nuclear dominance in the region. In the early 1980s, Libya acquired a research reactor from the Soviet Union and began uranium conversion experiments, reportedly assisted by an undisclosed nuclear-armed country suspected to be either China or the USSR. Gaddafi also purchased 80 Soviet-made missiles and launchers capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Libya relied heavily on black market procurement networks to source materials and expertise. A central figure in Libya's program was Swiss nuclear engineer Friedrich Tinner, who had close ties with Abdul Qadir Khan, the architect of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. The two had studied together in Belgium and collaborated in a global nuclear smuggling ring. Through this network, Libya acquired centrifuges and nuclear weapon blueprints that had originated in China and passed through Pakistan. Despite numerous sanctions and international pressure, Libya persisted. In the mid-1990s, Gaddafi promised US President Bill Clinton that he would abandon the program to have sanctions lifted. Yet by the early 2000s, Libya had expanded its imports of nuclear technology, including critical components for uranium enrichment. However, Libya faced ongoing technical difficulties and lacked the expertise to make full use of the acquired centrifuges. In 2001, US President George W. Bush warned Gaddafi to dismantle his WMD programs or face destruction. This ultimatum, combined with growing international isolation, prompted Libya to reverse course. In 2003, Gaddafi agreed to fully dismantle his nuclear, chemical and biological weapons efforts in coordination with the US, UK and Russia. Subsequent investigations revealed dozens of previously undisclosed nuclear facilities. Libya had produced some enriched uranium, but was still estimated to be 3 to 7 years away from completing a functional atomic bomb. US forces arrested Tinner and Gaddafi's sons, one of whom claimed they were secretly working with the CIA. Despite disarmament, Gaddafi later expressed regret, accusing Western powers of failing to reward Libya's cooperation. He retained small amounts of nuclear and chemical material as political leverage. After the Arab Spring in 2011, NATO-backed rebels overthrew the Libyan regime and executed Gaddafi. Today, Libya's nuclear program is entirely dismantled. It is not considered a threshold state and lacks the infrastructure, expertise and political stability to resume any nuclear weapons effort. Syria. Syria has been a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, since 1969, but for decades it attempted to acquire nuclear capabilities through covert means. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Syria approached multiple countries, including China, Russia, Argentina and India, for nuclear reactor technology. However, all of these attempts were blocked under international pressure, particularly from the United States and Israel. In the early 2000s, concerns escalated when satellite imagery and intelligence reports revealed the construction of a facility in the Deir ez-Zor region, strongly resembling North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear reactor. A known site for weapons-grade plutonium production, analysts concluded that the reactor was not declared to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, violating Syria's obligations under the NPT. It was suspected to be part of a secret nuclear weapons program with North Korean assistance. Israel, viewing the reactor as a potential existential threat, launched a preemptive airstrike in 2007 under Operation Orchard, also known as Operation Outside the Box. 8 Israeli fighter jets destroyed the facility, killing approximately 10 North Korean technicians believed to be working there. Syria initially denied the nature of the site, but the IAEA later confirmed the discovery of processed uranium and concluded that the destroyed facility was indeed a nuclear reactor designed for weapons purposes. Following the strike, Syria refused to cooperate fully with international inspectors, and details about its broader nuclear ambitions remained limited. The country's ongoing civil war since 2011, along with the collapse of much of its infrastructure, has made any further development of nuclear weapons infeasible. Today, Syria is not considered a threshold state. The 2007 strike effectively ended its nuclear ambitions, and the current political and military instability makes any return to such a program highly unlikely. Japan initiated multiple nuclear weapons projects during World War II, beginning in 1941. The Japanese Army and Navy ran separate programs focusing on uranium separation and reactor development. However, internal divisions, limited resources, and Allied bombing disrupted progress. One facility working on uranium separation was destroyed in a US air raid in 1945. The Navy's parallel program in Kyoto never advanced beyond theoretical studies. After the war, the US discovered significant nuclear infrastructure in Japan, including 5 cyclotrons capable of enriching uranium, which were dismantled and discarded into Tokyo Bay. A German submarine carrying uranium for Japan was also intercepted by Allied forces. There was an unverified report in 1946 suggesting that Japan may have conducted a nuclear test in occupied Korea, but this has not been confirmed by credible evidence. Following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan adopted a staunch anti-nuclear stance. However, this position became more nuanced after China conducted its first nuclear test in 1964. In response, the Japanese Prime Minister told US President Lyndon B. Johnson that if China had nuclear weapons, Japan should too. This shocked the US leadership. Japan then adopted the 3 non-nuclear principles. It would not manufacture, possess, or permit the introduction of nuclear weapons into its territory. These principles were politically binding, though not enshrined in law. Japan signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, in 1970, but made it clear that it would maintain the technical ability to produce nuclear weapons if needed. During the Cold War, the US stationed approximately 1,200 nuclear warheads in Okinawa until 1970. Japan did not protest these deployments until sovereignty over the island was restored. Today, Japan is considered the most capable threshold state in the world. It has vast amounts of plutonium, enough for thousands of nuclear warheads and advanced enrichment facilities. Japanese scientists possess the knowledge, infrastructure and industrial capacity to produce a nuclear weapon in less than a year if the political decision were made. While public sentiment in Japan remains largely against nuclear weapons, growing threats from North Korea and China have prompted some leaders to suggest hosting US nuclear weapons or revisiting Japan's defense policies. Despite its pacifist constitution, Japan remains a virtual nuclear power, armed with the ability but not the intent. Taiwan. Taiwan, though not officially recognized as a sovereign nation by the United Nations, developed one of the most advanced secret nuclear weapons programs of any non-nuclear country. The program began in 1967 after China's successful nuclear test in 1964, which elevated the strategic threat perceived by Taiwan's government. Taiwan acquired a Canadian-supplied reactor, the same model India later used to produce weapons-grade plutonium, and also imported 100 tons of uranium from South Africa. Additionally, it obtained plutonium from the United States, all under the guise of peaceful energy development. Throughout the Cold War, the US even stationed nuclear weapons in Taiwan until 1974. Taiwan succeeded in producing weapons-grade plutonium using heavy water reactors. However, after the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, detected suspicious activity in 1976, Taiwan agreed to terminate its program. Despite this, it secretly resumed nuclear weapons development in the 1980s, purchasing another 4,000 tons of uranium from South Africa and designing a nuclear device they believed could function without live testing. The strategy relied on simulated cold tests, experiments that use conventional explosives to mimic the conditions of a nuclear detonation without achieving actual fission. Taiwan's engineers used high-speed impacts between uranium plates disguised as anti-tank projectile tests to refine their bomb design. In 1986, satellite surveillance reportedly detected a small nuclear cold test in the Zopang military zone. While not a full explosion, it likely confirmed the viability of their device. In 1987, the head of Taiwan's nuclear weapons program, who was also a CIA informant, defected to the United States. He revealed that Taiwan's program was just 1 to 2 years away from completion. They had already designed a large bomb, but still needed to miniaturize it for aerial deployment. Because Taiwan is not a member of the United Nations, it cannot officially sign the NPT. However, it has entered into specific non-proliferation agreements with the US and the IAEA. Based on historical progress, technical capabilities, and ongoing research, Taiwan is classified as a threshold state. Experts estimate it could develop a nuclear weapon in 1 to 2 years, but doing so would likely trigger severe consequences. Most notably, a full-scale military invasion from China, which has repeatedly vowed to reunify Taiwan by any means necessary. South Korea. South Korea initiated nuclear weapons research in response to shifting geopolitical threats, particularly following the Korean War and the subsequent withdrawal of some US forces in the early 1970s. Although the United States had stationed nearly 1,000 nuclear weapons in South Korea during the Cold War, concerns grew when Washington signaled its intention to scale back its military presence. In 1970, the South Korean government began quietly exploring its own nuclear weapons program. The effort intensified in 1975 after the fall of South Vietnam. when South Korea feared being left vulnerable to communist aggression. A secret nuclear program was launched, relying on technology and materials obtained from France, Belgium, and the United States, formerly intended for civilian energy development. South Korea sought to acquire plutonium reprocessing technology from France to extract weapons-grade material from spent reactor fuel. However, strong diplomatic pressure from the US prevented the transfer. Although South Korea publicly ended the program, it secretly continued small-scale plutonium separation activities. In 1982, they successfully extracted plutonium again, prompting further intervention from the US, which offered expanded energy support in exchange for halting the weapons work. Despite repeated pledges to remain non-nuclear, South Korea enriched uranium in 2000 to a level of 77%, dangerously close to weapons grade. The revelation of this enrichment came years later, renewing global concerns about South Korea's dual-use capabilities. Tensions escalated in 2006 when North Korea conducted its first nuclear test. This significantly altered South Korean defense thinking. Though the US had removed its nuclear weapons from the peninsula in the 1990s, South Korean leaders began calling for their return. By 2023, the US agreed to periodically deploy nuclear-armed submarines near South Korea in exchange for assurances that Seoul would not pursue its own arsenal. Public sentiment in South Korea has shifted markedly. Polls in 2023 showed that over 76% of South Koreans supported developing domestic nuclear weapons. Technically, South Korea has the expertise, infrastructure, and industrial capacity to produce a nuclear bomb within 1 to 2 years. It is the only non-nuclear nation to operate submarines capable of launching nuclear missiles. Despite these capabilities, South Korea remains a non-nuclear state under the NPT. Its future path will likely depend on regional security developments and continued faith in the US nuclear umbrella. Myanmar. Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, initiated a secret nuclear weapons program in the early 2000s, with alleged assistance from North Korea. While officially focused on energy development, multiple sources and defectors later revealed that the project had military objectives. In 2009, 2 senior Myanmar officials defected to Australia, providing documents and testimonies suggesting that Myanmar was pursuing nuclear weapons in cooperation with North Korea. According to reports published in the Sydney Morning Herald, the program aimed to complete a functional weapon by 2014. Key facilities, including a reactor and a plutonium extraction plant, were reportedly hidden in caves carved into remote mountains. A 5-year investigation using documents from a defected Myanmar military officer uncovered additional details. It indicated that North Korea had supplied technical knowledge and possibly equipment for uranium enrichment and reactor construction. The United Nations also confirmed that North Korea had violated international sanctions by providing illicit nuclear assistance to Myanmar. Despite these revelations, experts remained skeptical of Myanmar's capabilities. The country lacked key infrastructure, trained nuclear scientists, and access to high-quality materials. Its industrial base was underdeveloped and its economy was not capable of sustaining a full-scale nuclear program without substantial foreign aid. In 2011, the United States acknowledged concerns about Myanmar's ambitions, but later stated that its fears had diminished. Myanmar subsequently announced that it had halted its nuclear energy research and denied pursuing nuclear weapons. However, then-President Thein Sein privately told US President Barack Obama that Myanmar had previously cooperated with North Korea on defense matters, confirming partial truth to the allegations. In 2018, Myanmar signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but has not yet ratified it. Today, Myanmar is not considered a threshold state. The program, if it existed in full, was in its early stages and has since been abandoned. The country lacks the necessary technical base and infrastructure to quickly or effectively build nuclear weapons. Brazil. Brazil pursued an extensive and covert nuclear weapons program during the late 20th century, particularly under its military dictatorship from 1964 to 1985. Although Brazil had a civilian nuclear energy program dating back to the 1950s, military interest in nuclear weapons intensified in the 1970s through a secret initiative called the Parallel Program. This clandestine effort involved all 3 branches of Brazil's military, army, navy, and air force, and was partly motivated by a regional rivalry with Argentina, which had similar nuclear ambitions. Brazil developed uranium enrichment plants, a plutonium reprocessing capability, and a missile development program. In the 1980s, the country acquired highly enriched uranium from China and secured additional equipment from West Germany, France, and the United States, all under civilian pretenses. Brazil is rich in uranium and holds the 6th largest reserves in the world. In 1981, it secretly exported 8 tons of uranium to Iraq for Saddam Hussein's nuclear program. By 1987, Brazil's president announced that the country had enriched uranium to 20%, a significant step toward weapons-grade material. Subsequent investigations revealed that Brazil had successfully designed 2 nuclear bombs, one with a yield of 20-30 kilotons, larger than the bomb dropped on Nagasaki, and another with a 12 kiloton yield, smaller than the Hiroshima bomb. A test site was also constructed in the Amazon region at a military base called Cachimbo. This included a 320-metre deep shaft where a nuclear test was planned for 1990. However, Brazil's political climate shifted. In the late 1980s, the country transitioned from military dictatorship to democratic governance. The new democratic leadership opposed nuclear weapons. In a symbolic move, the new president shut down the weapons program in 1990 by pouring concrete down the test shaft himself. In 1991, Brazil and Argentina signed mutual disarmament agreements, and Brazil formally joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, in 1997. Despite dismantling its weapons program, Brazil retained significant nuclear infrastructure. Experts believe that if Brazil chose to restart its weapons effort, it could produce a nuclear bomb within 3 years. For this reason, Brazil is considered a threshold state, the most advanced in Latin America. Argentina. Argentina developed a limited nuclear weapons program during the 1980s, primarily in response to Brazil's parallel efforts. At the time, both countries were under military dictatorships and engaged in a quiet regional arms race. Argentina's ambitions accelerated during the 1982 Falklands War with the United Kingdom, prompting fears that Argentina might seek nuclear weapons as a deterrent in future conflicts. The country's nuclear capabilities were rooted in its extensive civilian program. Argentina had already established nuclear infrastructure through partnerships with Canada and West Germany, securing reactors and a heavy water plant. The Soviet Union also provided nuclear equipment. By 1983, Argentina's government publicly confirmed it had the capacity to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels. However, it stopped short of stating an intent to build atomic bombs. Argentina's nuclear weapons efforts were modest compared to Brazil's. The program remained largely theoretical and was never accompanied by detailed bomb design work or test site preparation. When Argentina's dictatorship ended in the early 1980s, the new democratic government prioritized peaceful development and dismantled any lingering military aspects of the nuclear program. Tensions with Brazil also eased significantly, reducing the motivation for nuclear competition. In 1991, both countries signed a landmark bilateral agreement to halt their nuclear weapons programs and allow mutual inspections. This was later reinforced by Argentina's decision to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, and work closely with the IAEA. Today, Argentina is not considered a threshold state. Although it has strong technical expertise and an established nuclear energy sector, it never made serious progress toward building an actual weapon and shows no current interest in doing so. Other failed efforts. Several other countries made minimal or short-lived attempts to acquire nuclear weapons, but none progressed beyond early research or diplomatic discussions. These cases typically lacked funding, technical capacity, or political will to develop an actual program. Australia explored the possibility of acquiring nuclear weapons during the Cold War. It requested tactical nukes from the United States and the United Kingdom, but was denied. Australia briefly considered developing its own arsenal, but ultimately abandoned the idea, deeming it too costly and complex. Today, Australia remains firmly committed to non-proliferation and operates only a peaceful nuclear research program. Algeria developed a nuclear energy program and was suspected of having military intentions, particularly due to its relationship with China and construction of a secretive facility. However, no conclusive evidence emerged that Algeria pursued nuclear weapons seriously. It signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and is not considered a threshold state. Egypt, under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, showed strong interest in nuclear weapons in the 1950s and 1960s, primarily to counterbalance Israel's undeclared arsenal. Egypt sought assistance from the Soviet Union but was denied. Though it made rhetorical threats and invested in nuclear research, it never established a functional weapons program and ultimately signed the NPT in 1981. Italy had brief ambitions of developing its own nuclear weapons during the Cold War. It possessed the technical capability and hosted US nuclear warheads under NATO arrangements. While it considered building an independent arsenal, the United States persuaded Italy not to pursue it. Today, Italy is a threshold state with full technical capability but no political intent to build nuclear arms. Turkey has also hosted US tactical nuclear weapons under NATO and considered building its own arsenal several times. While it possesses some technical infrastructure, it never developed an indigenous weapons program. However, due to its advanced defense sector and regional security concerns, Turkey is also categorized as a threshold state. The Philippines hosted US nuclear weapons on its territory during the Cold War, but never pursued its own program. No significant nuclear research infrastructure exists today, and the country remains committed to non-proliferation. Indonesia briefly expressed interest in nuclear weapons during the Cold War and sought help from China and the Soviet Union. However, the effort never materialized into a formal program. Indonesia now focuses solely on peaceful nuclear energy and maintains a strong non-proliferation stance. None of these countries are considered active threshold states, and all remain members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or related disarmament agreements. Their nuclear ambitions, where they existed, were either stopped by international pressure or faded due to political shifts and cost barriers.